So thank you all for coming. As I was saying, each year I'd gone to commercial events and to business events of what was going on in the economy and what was going on in the commercial arena. And we didn't have anything in the residential arena, but we have over 10,000 real estate agents, however many lenders, title companies, etc. And I keep hearing that housing represents something of like 15% of the US economy overall, from when people change and they buy stuff, buy new commodities because they just sold a house or they just bought a house. And so it's a huge part of our infrastructure here in the United States and our economy. And I wanted to hear what was going on. So every year for the last 4 years, this is year number 4, I've been putting together the residential roundup with the best people that I can find to present. Sandev Varshney, who's the former dean of the business school at CSUS, he was going to be here with us. He got called out of town on an emergency business trip and is somewhere in Asia right now with spotty internet, so he was not able to present with us. I'm hoping that we can get him next year. Our first speaker today is going to be Ryan Lundquist. And Ryan Lundquist is a certified appraiser and a housing market analyst. And I've known Ryan since about 2010, and I love the information that he provides. I value it greatly, and I respect him as a market analyst. He's got a top-rated national blog, the Sacramento Appraisal blog, and has been quoted in many publications locally and nationally. He's also been involved with the Association of Appraisers, the Sacramento Association of Appraisers, and with our local Association of Realtors for many years. And his clients are homeowners, real estate agents, government agencies, CPAs, and attorneys. So I'm going to mute myself, and Ryan, you take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel, and it's really great to be here today. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate it, and I hope that by the end of this that you're thinking, I'm really glad I attended. Excuse me, just went on mute. But my goal is to tell the story of the market, where we went last year, where we are right now, and to maybe give some ideas for what to focus on in the future. I don't have a crystal ball, believe it or not. I can't
Ryan,
predict.
Your video's off.
Joel, it says that the host stopped it, so I'll focus. I'll let you figure that out, okay? But for right now, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And can everyone see my screen? If you can let me know in the chat, that would be so great. I'm going to keep watching the chat, and then hopefully answer questions and stuff. And so feel free to. Yeah, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Wonderful, wonderful. I'll be watching the chat, but let's talk shop. We basically had the most aggressive market ever in the Sacramento region. This is statistically true, and I would say in technical terms, the market was just absolutely nuts last year. I cannot believe the stats that I was pulling each month and then sharing on a consistent basis, okay? And so, but what we've had in this market is that we've had, I think, a rise of the real estate profits. Has anyone, heard real estate prophecies? And really, as a stats guy, I've been pulling numbers for so many years. I mean, it's been since 2013. Everyone is saying the market's going down, it's going to tank, and but right now, here we are. The market is really, really aggressive in 2022. This is a photo by a realtor, Desiree Taylor, of a property in Colonial Village in Sacramento, and you could see a line of people waiting to get into the house, and surely there's going to be multiple bids. And so I think for some people who thought definitely 2021 was the top of the market, here they are thinking, well, I sold and we're still going up. And so it's just that wild dynamic. But in a real sense, a lot of people are saying, the market's going to crash. And I know when the pandemic first began, you had a lot of people who were saying, it's this pandemic, something really big is going to occur. And you know what? They were right that something big occurred. The market completely took off. But you know what they were wrong about? The direction, because I think a lot of people were predicting demise instead of what we've had. And a forbearance is going to crash the market, but then it hasn't. I'll show you some stats at the end. Or people say, you know, it's the eviction moratorium, this is going to wreak havoc on the market, and then nothing happens. Or there's a foreclosure tsunami on the horizon, but then, you know, there's not foreclosures brewing, which I'll show you statistically. Or, you know, it's Evergrande, you know, China's biggest investment fund, they're going to crash and then it'll take down the whole entire world. Or most recently, you know, Zillow exiting the market as a flipper signals that the top is here, when in reality, that has meant nothing for the direction of the market. Okay, but we go on. And this week, you know, a lot of people are talking about, you know, it's the stock market and it's cryptocurrency, or it's the end of single family zoning in California, it's rent control. And there's the flavor of the week every single week. And honestly, I think what we have to do is sift through hype and stay grounded. And so my advice would be to sift through the drama and start to look at the numbers. And that's kind of what I want to unpack through this presentation. And we're going to start, I want to walk through 6 records that were broken last year in the Sacramento region. And by the way, I'm paying attention to the chat. I can't look at the Q&A also. And so if you have a specific question, you know, just put it in the chat where everyone's talking, you know, saying, yes, they can hear me. So hope you guys are well. I'm sure you're looking really good today too. But basically for 18 months in a row, we've had less than 1 month of housing supply in the Sacramento region. This is a record. We have never seen this long of a housing drought, so to speak, with inventory this low. Here's what it looks like though. In the summer of 2020, as you can see on this visual, we went below 1 month and we've been hovering there for 18 months straight. And really, do you remember what happened in the summer of 2020? Mortgage rates went below 3%. So sometimes people are saying, hey, rates don't really drive the market, we just have so much demand. Well, one of the reasons why we have so much demand, why there are few listings, is because people are, you know, gobbling them up because of low rates. Okay, here's what it looks like though when I pull stats. Every January 1st, from January 2015 onward, I pulled the number of listings in the Sacramento region. This is kind of a cool snapshot. And you could see these past 2 years, 2021 and 2022, we had, you know, 1,100, 1,200 listings, and that's really about chopped in half of a normal trend. And so it's like the pandemic came along and then the number of listings were just halved. And so no wonder why it feels so aggressive. Okay, and this is kind of what it looks like to wait for more listings, a live shot of waiting for listings. Everyone's on Facebook going, do you have something coming up? I'm looking for a home. Or some sellers are watching going, you know, I'd really like to sell my home, but I just don't know if there's going to be something available, right? But here's what it looks like nationally. This comes from Altos Research. They have a fantastic video out every week. And as of yesterday, 277,000 listings in the whole entire United States. But look, that's down from, you know, it should be about twice as much in a normal trend. And so this isn't just something happening in Sacramento, but there's this severe housing shortage all across the country. Okay, but here's what the Sacramento market looks like. In blue, you can see new listings since 2016 onward. And you see this cyclical trend where there's more new listings in the beginning of the year, and then there's less, more and less, more and less. And so there's this real rhythm to the market. And so right now, we basically bottomed out last month, and we're slowly starting to tick up. Okay, we have started to see more listings in January, but if this market ends up being anything like last year, the market really won't start hitting its stride until about March or so. But do you guys see this trend here? Look at 2020 and 2021. The blue line, which is new listings, is way below a normal trend from previous years. And so it's been wild to watch. It's like the pandemic happened and then sellers started to, would-be sellers pump the brakes, and we just haven't seen as many homes come to market. Okay, but the remarkable part, look at the red line. These are pending contracts. And you could see that pendings during the pandemic have been very normal compared to previous years. And so it just shows that despite about half as many listings, and in some regards, we're seeing buyers buy basically everything. So we've still been able to have a pretty strong sales volume. Okay, and like I said, if you have any questions, hit me up in the chat. Would love to see what people are thinking. But 2021, another record, was the fastest moving market ever. And I think this is not a shocker at all to anyone who works in real estate, and buyers especially. It's sort of like a property hits the market, you better be making an offer. Okay. And so, but here's what it looks like statistically. The green line, this is over 20 years of the average days on market, how long it takes to get into contract. And last year was 17 days. And you could see that we've never seen a market where it only took 17 days. This is the entire year of sales. Okay, about 28,000 sales. That's a lot of information. And on average, it was only 17. Okay, and the median days on market was 7. So basically, half of all sales in the market took 7 days or fewer to get into contract. That's just insane. But look at this. Remember when the market was really declining? Taking over 100 days to sell, and amazing that, to think that properties were sitting on the market on average for 3 months. Okay. And here's a profound insight from a realtor. This market looks like Batman, right? Does it not? That's probably the most profound thing I'm going to share today. So cool observation. So, but also there were twice as many $1 million sales last year compared to the previous year. And so there's been massive growth. In fact, in the chat, if you're in real estate here, have you sold something over $1 million lately? Or if you are a buyer here or seller here, are you above $1 million? I'd love to hear some comments. What are you seeing out there? But basically, statistically, and I see some yeses, thank you so much. Statistically, you can see that there were about twice as many $1 million sales, but $1 million sales represented, I would say, a whopping 7% of the market. Now, I know that doesn't sound whopping, but that's a huge number compared to previous years. But it is worth noting, 93% of the market isn't above $1 million. And so I think sometimes buyers eyeing the market are going, there's no way I can afford, everything's above $1 million. And I say, well, 93% of the market isn't. Okay, these aren't adjusted for inflation. You can do that if you want to geek out. Okay, but we saw the highest percentage of multiple offers ever. And I know buyers are looking and going, man, I am already stressed here. What in the world? But that's the nature of the beast right now. Okay, here's a live look at what it's like for buyers to fight to get into contract, right? That's pretty much what it has felt like. And by the way, did anyone see Squid Game? In the comments, let me know. Excellent and very, very gory show. But you can see statistically, these are multiple offers through the years. First of all, there's a cycle where sort of more multiple offers during the beginning of the year, and then less, more and less. There's this rhythm to the market, okay? And usually around April or May, we see the peak of the multiple offers, okay? And so look at the peak this year. I mean, it was just bananas to see that 76% of all sales had multiple bids. And so I know some people look and go, there's no way that, that can't be true because 100% of properties are getting multiple offers. No way, 100% would be crazy. Yeah, but look at 76%. That is so far disconnected from the normal trend. Okay, but here's the kicker. I think this is sort of the big stat. In December, last month, 57% of sales had multiple offers. And look at this number, because for a December, it's higher than any other spring market. At the top of spring, we were higher in December compared to previous years besides 2021. Is that just mind-blowing, or am I just a nerd in the room? Okay, maybe both, but that is crazy. And so that's why for the last couple of months, I've been saying, buckle up, because the market's at this really aggressive space. I mean, how long can this last? I mean, we'll share a few thoughts about that maybe at the end of the presentation, but it's been pretty wild. But here's a look, I think, at December. I'll let you crunch these stats more specifically when you get the PDF. Joel's going to send that out, but you can look at this in December 2019. This would be a little bit more of a normal year. About 25% of sales sold above the list price. Okay, this last December, it was 54%. And so we have this lopsided dynamic where literally a little bit more than twice as many homes last month sold above the list price, when a normal trend should be like, there should be about a quarter of them. And so it's really, really lopsided. Okay, 1 year of paying at or above the list price. Okay, this isn't maybe a very sexy stat and graph, but I think it's really stunning, because basically for 12 months straight, we saw buyers pay on average either at the list price or above, and that is highly uncommon. This does not happen. Very, very unusual to see. And so at the peak of the market in June 2021, on average, buyers paid about $26,000 over the list price. And I know what you're saying is like, hey, I had to pay 80 grand over to get an offer accepted. I had to pay, 40,000. I get that. This is the average though. That month there were 2,800 sales. The average was 26,000. To get up at that level is just crazy. Okay, but do you see what happened during the second half of the year? The market actually softened. And guys, I feel like these past 2 quarters, I have had so many comments saying, stop saying the market is slow. And I just want to say for the record, I have never said that. But you know what I have said? The market absolutely was slowing down from the craziness of last spring. That's statistically true. But here's the problem, okay? The market slowed in December to still at being above the list price. You know where the market should have been? The market should have been about $15,000 to $20,000 below the list price in December. And so it's a market on steroids. And someone asked, what's the 26,000 of the average, price? This was buyers paying 4.1% over the list price on average, the highest percentage I've ever seen. And so that's bananas. Okay. So very, very uncharacteristic. So the highest dollar growth ever. This is the astounding part. If anyone knows, what year are we in this price cycle? We just entered year number 11 in the Sacramento region. Okay. And here we are seeing exponential growth. Here's what the market looked like. For a while, the market was slowing down. This is the median price change from 2014 through 2019. And do you see in 2014, we are seeing, 8 to 14%, change, but then all of a sudden the market was slowing down. It's like this car on the freeway that was going, 100 miles per hour, and then it slows down to, 70. Okay, so it's still going forward. It's just going slower. In 2019, 4 to 6% growth. And then all of a sudden, a global pandemic happens, and you see what occurred? The market just sped up in a major way. Very uncharacteristic, okay? And so, but here's what we saw in dollar change. When you look at the Sacramento region from year to year, this past year, the median price went up by $90,000, okay? And you look over the past 20 years and go, okay, that's pretty wild, because in our 10th year of the price cycle, we saw the highest dollar change. Okay, and look at 2008. For kicks with a grain of salt. I remember what it was like going through that. Not a fun time for so many of us, but $123,000 loss during that year. Just astounding. Here's the average sales price, up about 99,000. Still, a record really. We've never seen that much dollar growth in 1 year. And from a percentage standpoint, I didn't bring the visual. It's on my blog. It wasn't a record for percentage. We've had 3 other years where we got up to about 20%. But what's astounding is that in our 10th year of price growth, we were able to see 20%. So just wild. But here's a look at right now, these past 2 weeks. Look, monthly stats have not come out yet, but look at this black line in 2021, and you could see that prices are up. And I suspect that we'll continue to see this line, just like other years, sort of up and down week by week. But we're on this upward trajectory for right now. It feels like a normal spring, actually a freakishly abnormal one, but a normal spring trend where we're at that place where we're going to see prices grow. Okay. Here's what it looks like in Sacramento County. By the way, are you guys still with me? Is anyone sleeping? I can't see your faces. But median price growth in the county was up 80,000, average price up 87,000. County to county differs. Placer was about 100 to 110. And what I would just say is, be careful that what we don't want to do is say my house is now worth 80,000 more. Maybe, maybe not. Look to the comps most of all. What story do the comps tell? We don't want to impose, these statistics. Okay, I was just reading a realtor friend's Facebook, and they made an offer on a property that's been on the market for about 30 days, and the seller rejected the offer because it was below the list price. The seller said, we're going to hold out, for more. And most properties are getting bid up. And I think, what a silly thing to do, because the seller's not listening to the market. The seller's listening to hot headlines. So not always easy to do. But here's basically what it feels like to be a buyer right now, right? I saw this when I was watching the 49ers and Cowboys play a couple of weeks ago. I saw instantly, when I saw this look of disappointment and among this woman and several other people that they showed, I thought they just became memes. And it's so true. But I just thought, this sort of captures what it's like to be a buyer right now. And it's hard to go in there. You feel like you're dropped into that cage, then you're just duking it out with everyone. Okay. And thanks, guys, for the kind words. Wide awake. I appreciate hearing that. So, but here's the wild part. If we break down last year, we really have to look at, what financing are buyers using? And when you look in the entire region, anytime I say region, I mean Sac, Placer, Yolo, and El Dorado. About 15% of buyers paid cash. Okay, 9% FHA, 4% VA, and a whopping 69% conventional. And what's interesting is that I think when I share this stat, it's actually surprising to people, right? And maybe you would agree, because I think that a lot of people looking onto real estate, they think that 85% of the market is cash and 15% is financed. And so I would say that this is a way to sort of use statistics where buyers feel like I can never get an offer accepted. I would say no, literally 85% of the entire market is financed. Okay, and so that's a very powerful stat. Okay, but here's sort of the stat with the asterisk though, because the problem is that yes, there's financing, but the buyer's waiving the appraisal contingency, or offering to pay above the appraisal, or guaranteeing a certain amount. And so that's where I think cash is winning in the midst of financed offers. So there's always an asterisk, but I do think that there's a little bit of hope there. And the usual percentage of cash buyer, it's a hard question, because what is normal? Okay. In 2012, 2013, the very top of cash buyers, 36% of the market in Sacramento County was cash. Okay. For years, we've been seeing cash decline though, because it's so cheap to borrow money. Okay. And so investors, why would they spend their own cash when they can just borrow? Okay. So that's part of the issue too. Okay, but the $1 million market, here's the interesting thing. You look at cash in the region, but look at cash in the $1 million market, about 23% of the market instead of about 15. And so there's more cash, basically the higher you go, I pulled some stats last week on my blog, the higher you go in price, the more cash there tends to be. Kind of a normal trend, but it's interesting. And I think it's a reminder that the market isn't the same in every single price range, and it's not the same in every single neighborhood. Okay. FHA, obviously 0%. VA, there were 55 sales above $1 million VA last year. So just a good reminder, especially if you're a seller here, don't be scared of that VA offer. Veterans can basically qualify for, as long as they can qualify, they can pay. But conventional too is the dominant force. Okay, here's a look at FHA over the past decade, and you can see there's been a downtrend. And I think sometimes people look at this and go, "Man, this means that first-time buyers are struggling." And I'd say, well, I think part of it means that first-time buyers using FHA financing, it's more difficult to get an offer accepted. But I think the bigger story is that conventional has become a much more viable product, and it's sort of diminishing FHA's role in the market. Okay, FHA is just less relevant, right? It's sort of the Cavaricci jeans of, the 80s. They just phase out after a while. Hope that wasn't awkward. I don't know why I thought of Cavaricci's. I had a pair. Did anyone have a pair? Let me know in the comments. But here's, I think, a little bit of context. About 19% of sales under 500,000 were FHA in Sacramento County in 2021. So about 1 out of 5 sales were actually FHA. And so I think sometimes, depending on the neighborhood and the price point, we see some different statistics. Remember, the market isn't the same everywhere. So, and someone says, Yuri says, I don't know what those are. You'll have to Google them. They were a mistake in fashion, I think, and pretty cringy. So, but here's a photo from Rico Rivera, and it just shows that here's a first-time buyer price range in South Sacramento. And all the agents leaving cards on the counter. And, in this situation, there were 30 offers, and just difficult to compete against that many offers. But I think the thing to note is that most properties aren't getting that many offers, okay? But still, if most properties are getting 5 to 7 offers, it's tough with that much competition still. And so what we want to see happen is the market cool at some point, so that buyers have more of a fighting chance, maybe have a little bit more time to make real estate decisions. But how much have prices risen from the bottom? I think this is a really powerful visual. And you can see by the county, when you look at the dollar amount, that basically all ships rise with the tide, where there's about $325,000 to $350,000 price growth, depending on the county, from all of 2012 compared to all of 2021. Okay. And here's the thing. My advice, if you work in real estate here today, is that, sellers are looking at the market, and then they're wondering, first of all, how can I afford higher prices? And they're also wondering, will there be anything for me to buy? Those are the questions to focus on. But what I would do is look at statistics like this and help sellers understand, how can you deploy your equity? Okay. How can you take your property in the Arden Arcade area of Sacramento? You might say you pull comps and you have $275,000 in equity. How do you deploy that and move to El Dorado County or Placer County or Roseville, wherever it's going to be? I think sellers and would-be sellers need to understand that, sometimes you actually can afford in this market. Maybe your mortgage payment stays very similar. Maybe it doesn't go up too much, but you're able to deploy your equity, which is your power in this market. Okay. But does it feel like everything listed is an iBuyer listing right now? Okay. And let me know in the comments, do you think that's the case? Have you looked out and said, my word, why are we seeing so many listings from Zillow and Open Door and Redfin? And so Rebecca says, when looking at the statistic for FHA buyers under 500K, would you agree it's most likely less due to the fact that most homes are priced higher but not qualifying for FHA? I don't know. That's hard to say. I would just say that at lower price ranges, buyers are more prone to, put, more or less money down, and they just can compete at that level. So, but anyway, has anyone felt like everything's an iBuyer? I think a lot of people said that. Someone in the comments said, iBuyer listings are way overpriced. Someone says, yes and no. But here's a stat. About 13% of every single listing and pending right now are iBuyers, and that's a huge number. About a year ago, this was more like 1 to 2%, and so we've seen a dramatic change in the market. Okay, but there's actually a reason for this change. Do you know what happens in November and December for me and for you? All of us start to think about Thanksgiving and the holidays, and we're starting to hibernate for the season. But iBuyers bought all these properties, and they were the ones who weren't hibernating. And so they, right now, while the rest of the market is starting to wake up, they've been here, pumping hundreds of listings into the market. And so whether that's good or bad, that's for you to decide. Okay, and an iBuyer would be basically a technological buyer, an institutional buyer, purchasing homes en masse, sometimes on the market, sometimes off the market, and their goal is to flip them. Okay, and that's what Zillow was trying to do in the market before they exited. They weren't able to succeed. Not much violin music for them failing, at least. But here's kind of what we're looking at. iBuyers right now, as of yesterday, they own 776 properties in the Sacramento region. And you could look, here's the breakdown by Redfin, Zillow, Open Door. And there's a new iBuyer that came to California as of January 1st. And probably, I don't know, throughout all of the state, but they're definitely, trying to gain a foothold in California, OfferPad. Okay. But here's the thing. I wrote a blog post in June. And at the time in June, about 7 months ago, at the time, there were 229 iBuyer owned homes. And so it's amazing to see over 500 more in a very short period of time. And so a couple things. Number one, this isn't a huge sliver of the market. Okay, the vast bulk of the market is the traditional model. Okay, but I think this can sort of maybe force the real estate community to be more efficient, to serve well, and it'll maybe force some of the systems to change over time as technology comes to the market, but the traditional model is so overwhelmingly dominant. Okay, but also I think that we see that this model is not going to every neighborhood. And so my advice, especially for real estate agents who are concerned about this, is that specialize in the hard stuff, the stuff that's difficult to value, properties on acreage, okay? Properties in classic neighborhoods, higher price points, okay? That's a good way to insulate your real estate career. And same thing with appraiser colleagues are here, okay? And Pablo asks about crash stuff. I'm going to get my very last slide. We're going to talk about market cycles, and so I hope I can get to that, okay? But there's no mistaking, there's an emphasis on Wall Street targeting residential real estate, okay? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been, a lot of investment funds that are targeting the market, and it's a real trend, I think, where it's surprising in one regard, where we look and go, how can these funds be making things work after 10 years of price growth? Like, are they crazy to jump in? But clearly they are seeing something. And I think in some regards, you have like a company like Invitation Homes. They were playing the Sacramento market in 2012, 2013. They bought thousands of homes. They used to be backed by Blackstone. Blackstone is no longer involved in what they're doing, but since May of this year or last year, they purchased 171 units. And I think that number is actually over 200, for various reasons, but it's amazing that here they are, and in a lot of regards, they're actually buying homes off of MLS. And so they're directly competing with buyers, typically between 400 and 600,000. Okay, but what are they seeing? I think in large regard, they're paying attention to rent. Do you guys remember this guy? He ran for governor in New York, years ago. And that was his slogan: the rent is too damn high, right? I think he could probably get some votes in California right now as we're eyeing rent, okay? But when you look at Sacramento, we've seen explosive rent growth, okay? And so the market is really tight in the resale market, but it's not just about what you can buy. Renters are struggling the same. And here's some stats. I know this is tiny, put out by Yardi Matrix, where Sacramento was number 5 on their list in December. And you could see that they say that there were 23 prospective renters for every listing. Now, this deals with apartments, but I really, this trend is very consistent with the rest of the single family market too. Steve says, do you have any stats that reflect the percentage of sales in SAC from Bay Area buyers? I didn't include a lot of that here. Dean is going to talk about Bay Area, so I specifically only have one slide about the Bay. But I would say that there's some stats from the Postal Service and San Francisco Chronicle, a lot of different sources. There's clearly been an increase, but also I think sometimes it's exaggerated, okay? But what's going on with 2 to 4 units? Basically, here's 2 to 4 units last year, almost 17% price growth. It's nearly the same trend as what we've seen in the single family market, okay? Some cool stats. Nobody else has put this out there, so I'm really excited to share stuff like this. What's the breakdown of who's buying duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes? Look at this, 63% of the market is conventional. And so conventional is the dominant force in the market. Look, 20% is cash. And so cash, very similar to what we're seeing in the single family market. But look, cash in 2014, it's clearly declined. Like I said, who is spending their own money when you can borrow some money so cheaply? But here's the part for first-time buyers that I want us to just pay attention to for just a sec. 10% of the market last year for 2 to 4 units were FHA and VA buyers. Now, it's not easy to get into contract even on this, but 1 out of 10 buyers for multi-units were basically first-time buyers. And so I think when a market rises in price, we see first-time buyers target this type of product. We see buyers target mobile homes and manufactured homes and condos. And so I would just say, be on the lookout for what buyers can afford in this market. But, like Steve said, what's happening with the Bay Area? And, there's no mistaking that we've seen, growth. And it's just, I think sometimes in our market, sometimes people will throw out stats and be like 70% of all sales are Bay Area. And then I say, well, can you show me that statistically? Where are you getting that? And then there's never a response on the comment thread, because I don't think that's true. Okay, but here's the thing. Let me ask you in the comments. I'm going to share one trend on the Bay Area, one slide, and then I want to ask you what percentage of your business, if you work in real estate, is the Bay Area. Okay, here's a look at the median price all throughout the state of California in black. Okay, from 2016 onward, and then California is red. Now, in California, the state median price is sometimes about 250,000 higher. So what I did, I put these on a separate axis because that helps bring the trend together, and it looks really similar, right? Doesn't the trend throughout the state look just like Sacramento? And so here's my thing. Logically, at times we pin the entire market trend on the Bay Area, and we say that the Bay Area is driving our market like crazy. And I'm not discounting it. This is their presence is a reality. But we back up and go, oh my word, the entire state looks like this. And then we back up and look at other states in the entire country, and so many markets look just like this, with really aggressive price growth. There were markets that way outpaced our growth last year. And so we have to step back and concede, is the Bay Area driving the whole state, and are they driving the whole entire country? I would say no. And so in some senses, yes, this is a real trend, but let's keep it in check. Okay, sermon done. I hope that was helpful. That's my take, and I'm sticking to it. But are you watching the luxury market? Okay, and by the way, has anyone seen the Netflix series You, where this comes from? Totally creepy guy. So be careful of dudes like this. But in luxury, we've basically seen this trend. This compares creeper, absolutely. This compares, sales by price range from 2021 to 2020. And basically, look, there was about double growth, 100% growth above $1 million. And below 300,000, this market hardly exists, 70% fewer sales this year. And so here's the dynamic: less at the bottom, more at the top. Okay. And like Steve said, as long as companies in the Bay Area allow employees to continue work from home anywhere, they can move cheaper to SAC. Absolutely. And you're stealing my thunder. Definitely one of my points that I'm going to make here. But you look at change in sales in volume by price range. Look at by price range in 2021 is in black and 2020 is in blue. And basically look at above 500,000. These are the price ranges that have grown. And part of that is just prices went up. And so it's like the bottom of the market moved higher, but it's also people working from home and having more advantage and opportunity to get into real estate at, because they can play the market. Okay. This is a District 1 to make a Hunger Games reference. I would say that the market this past year has been very, very good for the luxury, for the high end. People are thriving, and we'll see what the stock market does and crypto and all that, but people have really, really gained a lot of wealth at higher prices. And so, yes, we are seeing more, Bay Area migration. I would say probably more at higher prices than anything, but kind of about anything. Okay. And thanks, Paul, appreciate that. But here's one thing I'm watching, because last year we saw in 2020, here's the median size. This sounds totally nerdy, guys, but this is really, really important. Okay, here's the median house size from 2012 onward. And in 2020, there was this big spike. And here's the average size in blue. So people were buying larger homes. And for a bit, we were thinking like, oh man, it's people want to quarantine in style. But you know what the real issue was? There's been a greater focus on luxury, and it sort of pushed up the average home size. But do you see what happened in 2021? It dipped down just a little bit. It almost looks like, home size has been increasing. It almost looks like we got back to normal. Okay, here's a different way to look at this. This looks like an EKG. Okay, and you could see around May or June each year, like clockwork, besides 2020, that was a weird year, but May or June, we see the spike in home size begin to crest for the year. And so the best stuff gets listed between now and probably April or so. The best stuff is listed, then it all closes by May or June, and then we see smaller homes hit the market. Okay, during the pandemic, especially 2020, there was this massive spike in home size. Okay, now here's the good part: that look at last year, these past 6 months, we got back down to a very normal level. Okay, we want to see normalcy in real estate. And so basically the next 5 to 6 months, I'm going to be watching home size very carefully, because I almost wonder if a little bit of the sizzle of working from home has begun to fade slightly. There's still a ton of job advertisements for working at home. Don't get me wrong, the luxury market is still booming like crazy, but I think if we start to see a change in home size over the next 2 quarters, then we'll go, okay, maybe we're getting back to normal. And that's sort of the hope. Okay. And so this is to be determined. Very, very subtle change right now, nothing to write home over, but that's kind of where we see change. Sometimes we see it in small ways first, and then after a couple quarters, we're like, yeah, this is happening. So we'll see what happens. Basically, I'm going to skip through some of this, but properties have been selling very quickly. In June of this year, 12 days was the low for the year. And then we got up to 23 days in December. And so, yes, the market legitimately slowed. The problem is it just didn't slow very much. Okay. And so it still felt crazy. Median days on market in the beginning of last year, 9 days, and then basically 6 to 7 days for this long stint. But then look, we got up to 11 days by December. So the market slowed, but just not slow to normal. Okay. But a lot of people, I have some comments on affordability, then cycles, and I'll close with 5 tips. A lot of people have been saying the market is not affordable. And especially if you work in real estate, how would you answer that? And I kind of want to show how I answer it by using stats. Okay. Here's a look at volume. Okay. By each month. Okay. So January to December down here. And the number of sales, this takes the average of 7 years of sales and puts them together. And here's the normal trend. In January, very few sales. Okay. But then you kind of see more and more happen as the spring market unfolds. And look, by June each year, that's typically the month where we top out. We hit the peak. And then for the second half of the year, we start to see that go down. And so sometimes people look at this, the second half of the year, they're like, what's wrong? Is the market starting to collapse? I go, no, people are focused on vacation, the kids getting back to school, the weather changes, and there's simply less activity, right? And so this is a normal trend. And when people say, the market's not affordable, you know what we want to look for? Less pending contracts, less mortgage applications, and less sales. Okay, so as of now, up to this point, the red line is 2021. And so I would say that there are definitely buyers who cannot afford the market, but in mass, we're not seeing buyers pump the brakes. Yeah, okay, we could have more Bay Area here. I understand that, but we've had very strong volume despite an increase in prices. Okay, or you look at a company or a county like Placer, and Placer was more elevated all year long. There's been a lot of migration to Placer, a lot of migration to El Dorado also. And so, yes, the market's becoming less affordable, but buyers are also getting it done. That's the story that stats are telling. As soon as that changes, I will change my tune. Okay. But here's the deal. Here's the housing affordability index from CAR. And it's clearly down from 2012, down by whatever county we're looking at in the region. And look at these past 2 years. Affordability has absolutely taken a hit. Like, we don't need this graph to tell us that. That is so painfully obvious. Okay. But here's a way to look at it. In Sacramento County, according to CAR, the second quarter or the third quarter of last year, they updated their stats. 39% of households can afford the median price. Okay, let me say that again. In Sacramento County, 39% of households can afford the median price. Or to put it negatively, 61% cannot. Okay, this is clearly down from over 70% of households could afford the market in 2012. And so affordability is going the wrong direction. Okay, and that's obvious. Okay, and with more price increases this year, I suspect these will go down. But here's context. What was affordability like at the low point in 2006? It was 19% in Sacramento County. And so it's not that I want to compare, right now versus then, but there's actually room for it to be less affordable, I would say, unfortunately. But here we have a lot of people saying the market is going to crash. It's like Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote a fantastic book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but he's also on, talking tour saying that we're going down. And honestly, I don't understand how people subscribe to YouTube channels where people make these prophecies, they don't come true, and they stay subscribed. I really don't get it. But here's the thing. On LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, everywhere I'm talking, about real estate socially, people are saying the market is about to crash. But let's look at some stats. You can see that mortgage delinquency by loan type. Okay. And you can see during the beginning of the pandemic, there was this spike in delinquencies. And so I understand at the time when people were like, whoa, this is a problem. This could end badly. But right now we're seeing delinquencies decline. Okay. And there's actually even the state of California is giving help to people to avoid foreclosure right now. There's a lot of pressure to not repeat what happened last time. And so delinquencies are heading the right direction. Okay. Here's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac from calculated risk. And you can see a similar dynamic where there was a spike in delinquencies. And right now delinquencies have been heading in the right direction. Okay. Here's forbearance. Forbearance were, properties where, people reached out to their lenders at the beginning of the pandemic, and 8% above 8% of all loans in the United States were in this process of forbearance where people weren't paying the mortgage for a season. And a lot of people said the market's going to crash, but now this is basically less than 2%. And so it's heading in the right direction. So again, some of those doom and gloom narratives, I would say, well, I understand what you're saying, but where are the statistics to prove that? Okay. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything at all. These are stats. Okay. But here's the deal. Mortgage originations by credit score. And you could see in this past cycle, there's a lot of blue here. And these are people who had a 760 plus credit score compared to say 2005, where very few. And so this is not to sugarcoat the market or to say that things aren't inflated. I think prices went way above where they should have gone had mortgage rates not done, the limbo. However, buyers are actually affording the properties. They're being scrutinized for, underwriting right now. And so they are able to afford what they're actually buying. That's a healthy sign, even in the midst of some crazy growth. Okay, but here's the thing. Some people look and go, you know what? This housing market will go on forever. And I would just say that the housing market in response would say, hold my beer, right? Because no commodity goes up forever, not crypto, not the stock market, not housing. And so let's kind of, look at that. So the future, unexpected things happen. For sure, right? Who thought that Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez would be, back together again, but sorry for the cheesy joke, but here we have, a housing market where nobody knows the future. A lot of people act like they do, and they've been making predictions for years. At some point they will be right, but in my mind, they lost credibility over the past 5 years in a row when they made the same prediction, repackaged it, they weren't right, and then they punt it down the road. Okay. Now, here's sort of what the market looks like. I shared this on Twitter and my socials today. Here's the Tahoe Park neighborhood. And you could see over 20 years of sales, we had an increase, we had a decline, and then we've seen this major increase. These aren't adjusted for inflation, of course, but I think sometimes people see this and they go, wow, this looks crazy, right? Am I right? When you're looking at this right now, are you having that similar response? I know on Twitter yesterday, that's absolutely what some people said, like, whoa, are we due for a collapse? And here's what I want to say. Here's what the price cycle looks like in Sacramento County. Okay, from 1975, unfortunately, it doesn't go to 2021. I need to adjust, add the last 2 years here. But when I look at the Freddie Mac price index, I adjust it for inflation. Do you see what the market does where it goes up and then it goes down and then it goes up and then it goes down, went way up, went way down. And do you see where there's this cycle where overall prices have sort of increased over time, but there's been these dips. Now, a lot of investors say the 7-year rule, the market changes every 7 years. And I can understand what they're saying because it looks like in many cases, the market goes up 7, 8 years or so. But here we are in year 11. Okay, and so there is no such thing as a 7-year rule. But here's the mistake, though. I think when we look at 2005, we're going, you know what? This is going to happen again because we're going to see this market crash because of crypto, because of, fill in the blank. Okay, but here's the problem. Look at the 1990s. They took about a 10 to 15% dip. By 2002, people could have been saying the market's going to crash. We're back to those price levels and we're going to go down 10 to 15%. But then look, the market went up for 3 more years and we actually saw this crazy drop of 50% plus. And so I just want to remind us that what happened last time isn't the new template for the future. Let me say that again. What happened during a previous cycle isn't the new formula for every future market correction. Okay, but you know what's normal? Prices go up and they go down. And so at some point, we would expect for prices to go down. Okay. That's what markets do. Okay. And so, but here's Bitcoin. This is my last slide before, 5 quick closing tips. And here's Bitcoin over the past year. And look, it almost looks like a trend where, prices went up and then they went down, then they went up, and they went down. We could look at this and go, if it looks like it's going to go down to about 30,000, and then it looks like it's going to rebound to about 70,000, because that's the pattern. But I think you would flog me if I said that was reality, because we have no idea. Okay. Now in real estate, it tends to be, it's not as erratic as cryptocurrency, but I think, it's just, there's humility there because we don't know the future. Okay. But 5 things to watch in 2022. I would say upward price pressure. We're poised to see more price growth. Okay. Absolutely. But we're also, I'd say we're poised to see price deceleration. Okay. This means that prices hopefully you won't go up as much as 20% like they did last year. Okay, we're poised to sort of like the market was going 130, and at some point it looks like it should slow a little bit, so there would be less price growth this year. I could be totally wrong. That's what I would, bet money on if I were a betting man, just in light of inflation, in light of mortgage rate increases. It looks like there's a few softening agents to help soften some of the growth. Okay. And then I would say watch for price resistance in some segments, whether it's first-time buyers or, really any market segment. Okay. Right now, the market is so incredibly on steroids. We are not seeing resistance. But what we want to do is we want to continue to watch and gauge the temperature to go, all right, where is that point where buyers do say, yeah, I can't afford this, I'm going to back off? Like that sort of moment has not happened. And so we just want to wait for where, when does that moment occur for some people? Okay. Mortgage rates can absolutely, rising can affect the feel of the market. Some people downplay this. We have a market that's very sensitive to rate changes. I tend to agree with, I think, Redfin's chief economist when she says that, mortgage rates are poised to rise to 3.6%. Whether she's right about that number or not, I like what she says is that when mortgage rates rise, that could soften some of the craziness in the market. Okay, but mortgage rates going up 3.5 to 3.7%, if that's what actually happens, it's not enough to stop this crazy train that has so much momentum. It is enough to slow down some of the insanity. And frankly, I think that would actually be good. I wrote a blog post last year about the need for mortgage rates to rise, and I think it got a little bit of flack. One guy unsubscribed, was like, "You've given yourself over to wokeism," and I was like, "Bro, what does that even mean?" But I think I stand by that. They do need to rise. They've been so low, it's created chaos. Okay, and last but not least, I would say pay attention to lifestyle buyers. Okay. Most people who buy and buy and sell real estate, it's because their lifestyle lines up with the market. So there's so much attention on prices. What are prices doing? And we talk about like it's so easy to time a market, but most of the time when I ask people in 2012, did you know it was the bottom? They say no. It was simply just the right time for me to buy. And so when people are looking for shelter, they're looking for a place to be. A lot of people are going to simply make real estate decisions this year, not because of geeky price metrics, because they need to move up, they need to move down, they inherited a home, or they need to invest, or they need to park their money somewhere, and so look for those opportunities. But I'd say watch consumer sentiment, finances with inflation, mortgage rates going up, what happens with stocks and crypto, all these things. Like there hasn't been this moment where everyone so collectively feels it in the wallet that they're stopping their decisions. Okay. And so right now it's gangbusters, but I would watch these things. I hope that was helpful. This is me on all my social channels on Sack Appraiser. I have a weekly blog post, try to write something thoughtful, but guys, I hope that this was helpful. I hope it was worth attending. And I'll stick around. There's a few other people that are going to present, and then I guess we can do some Q&A later, but otherwise, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and stop this share, and Joel will get this PDF to everyone also.
Brian, thank you so much. That's brilliant. I always appreciate and value what you have to say. I always learn more. We met back in 2010. We were kind of doing the same stuff for a couple of years, and then you way surpassed me. So I always appreciate and value what you bring to the table. Our next speaker or presenter will be Chris Irola. He's the owner of Property Pros Property Management. Is the current president of the California Landlord Association. Chris served 6 years at on the board of directors for the local chapter of the California Apartment Association, where he also served as chairman of the Government Affairs Committee. His company Rent Pros manages more than 1,000 properties locally and is the only management company to be awarded Property Management Company of the Year by the RHA Rental Housing Association 5 years in a row. So now we'll hear from you, Chris.
All right, thanks a lot, Joel. And hey, congratulations on 4 years. I didn't realize it had been 4 years since we all started this, or you started this. So great, that's a testament to the information that you're giving here. Okay, I just shared my screen. Can please confirm for me, Joel, that we are getting, you've got my logo up there and such?
Yeah, but can see it.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Ryan. Great job. In the rental industry, we don't have an MLS. We don't have a lot of the tracking requirements. When you rent a home to somebody, you advertise it, rent it. We don't have the tracking requirements you do sell. So a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about here is things that I can piece together from the internet, but a lot of empirical data as well in terms of my corral of properties, around 1,000 rentals that we manage, and then speaking with other property managers in the area. And of course, as president of California Landlord Association, I'm talking with a lot of investors, landlords, property managers, and attorneys up and down the state to glean all this together. Yep, I do have a cow named Oreo. That's her. She loves to be brushed every morning if she can get away with it. And of course, I named her Oreo, right? Why wouldn't I? What else would I name her? All right, so let's kind of start with the report I saw come out, an interview with the CEO of U-Haul. We all know how U-Haul works. If somebody's going to move from Sacramento to Dallas, Texas, for example, they rent a truck or a trailer and they put all their stuff in it, and then they go to Texas and then they drop off the trailer there. So U-Haul is able to pretty nicely track where people are moving, where they're moving from, where they're moving to. And U-Haul has been in business for 75 years. And the CEO was reporting last week that—
Chris, your slides are not advancing.
You don't have U-Haul there?
No, I have Rent Pros Property Management.
Oh. Well, what do you suppose that could be?
Is it advancing on your screen or?
Yeah, and it says that, oh, a minute, my sharing is paused. Why would that happen? I'm using it here. All right, I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to start it again.
Thank you.
Did not do it. Let's stop the share and let's go. I'm sorry, what do you see now, Joel? Wonderful. What just happened?
All right, I still don't see your screen shared, Chris.
Oh my goodness. All right. I'm sorry, guys. This is I'm out here with the internet.
Chris, do you want me to bring it up? And I'll share it, and you can just let me know when to switch through.
Yeah, let me give it one more shot here.
Okay.
Let's try it again from the beginning. Come on, babe. Okay. How are we doing now? See a disclaimer?
Yep, see the disclaimer.
Okay, now you see Oreo?
Yep, see Oreo.
All right, there we go.
Thank you.
Oreo's on, we're doing fine. Sorry about that. Okay, so U-Haul. You see the U-Haul slide now, Joel? And others?
Yeah, it looks good.
Right on. Okay, so they've been in business 75 years, and they're reporting seeing the largest exodus from California that they have ever seen. And I thought that was interesting. And they were talking about who's leaving, where they're going. And in general, people are leaving the big cities. They're leaving California and other states where they have high tax and high regulations. And there are only two cities in California that they said were growing. That would be San Diego and the Sacramento area. And I bring this up because, when we see regulatory changes, as we've seen, and we're going to talk about here in the rental industry, we see behavior changes. Landlords change what they're doing. Investors change what and how they're doing what they're doing. So you've all heard that rents are increasing. We call this rent inflation. The question is how much? So if we look around, we see that in the last year, on average in California, rents increased 15 to 20%. Remember that number, 15 to 20% last year alone. So for example, to make those numbers real, we would look at a home that was renting for $1,500 last year out in Roseville or where have you, would be $1,800 now. And in fact, that's what we're seeing very clearly. My colleagues are seeing the same thing. And when we look at the 5-year trend, the 5-year increase in California, we see actually a 50% on average rent increase, depending where you are. So to make the numbers real, if you look at a place like Roseville, where 5 years ago, $1,600 was a very good rent. Very few properties were renting for $1,800, $2,000. Now, Roseville is very commonly $2,400 a month in rent. So that's a significant increase, isn't it? I mean, that's $800 more per month out of someone's pocket to rent a property now in Roseville than it was just 5 years ago. Citrus Heights, same thing. 1,300 is now 1,500. The highest rent increase city that I found in California was in fact Stockton, where rents, granted, they started out a little low, but they had they realized a 60% increase in rents over the past 5 years. So rents have gone up, put a lot of pressure on renters, much more difficult to save now, isn't it, if you're a tenant? And so the result is we're seeing tenants actually stay longer in properties. Back in the day, in history, long time ago, 3 years ago, and before, it was very common to see, the average tenancy was about 1.5 years. And now it's not uncommon at all to have tenants renewing for the 3rd and 4th year, just because, well, it's harder to find a place that's going to be comparable with an acceptable rent amount. When we look at rent to income ratio, get this data from Intuit. You take the gross income that somebody earns, you divide that by actually the other way around. You take the rent that somebody's having to pay, you divide that by their gross income, and you look at what percentage of a person's rent or a renter's rent are they having to pay for housing. And this is a big range throughout the United States, depending on where you are. But on average, it's 28% in the South. 28% of income is being spent on housing. And then large cities like on the coasts, Los Angeles, New York, etc., that goes clear up to 45%. But when you look at US as a whole, it's actually much closer to that 40%. So compare this now to, there are articles in newspapers 6-7 years ago complaining that tenants were having to spend nearly 30% of their income, their gross income, on rent. And so now that's up to 40%. So the pressure on renters is definitely increasing. However, if you're a landlord, you're an investor, especially if you had a property for quite some time, well, this is all good news, isn't it? Because it's like having a stock where the dividend just increases tremendously. I've been managing property for 32 years, and it's very common knowledge that for the past 25 years at least, rents increased anywhere from 3 to 4% a year. In fact, this was one of our big arguments prior to 2020 as an opponent of rent control, is that rent control is saying, well, now you can, landlords, you can raise rent 5% plus your local CPI. And we're saying, but wait a minute, rents aren't even, the average is not even 5%, it's 3 to 4%. So now you're giving us, this option of 5% plus CPI. Well, what is that going to do to the mindset of the landlord, an investor? Whereas they anticipated, purchasing a property or owning a property, raising the rent 3 or 4% a year, and now you have rent control saying, well, you can go 5 plus CPI, which, by the way, CPI now is around 4. So the allowable annual rent increase in California, well, in our region of Northern California here, is the 5 plus 4%, so 9%. So if you're an investor, you're a landlord, and you're saying, well, I've usually got 3 to 4%, but I can go 9%. What are you going to do? Well, it actually, mindset wise, and this is just opinion, this is just empirical observation, is that landlords are now saying, let's go the max, let's not get behind. And especially for those landlords who have owned properties for years and had sort of a mom and pop mentality, we call it, where they did not increase rents dramatically. In fact, left the rents considerably under value for many years, are now wanting to catch up. So they're wanting to see this maximum rent increase. This is a really major trend that we've noticed as property managers, is that owners want to know, in the past, they wanted to keep the tenant, keep them happy, let's go 3 or 4%. Now it's very, very common, and much more common, and almost always the owners want to raise the rent as much as they can, as soon as they can. And so we've seen this big trend here. So the question is why? Ryan just talked about people. Well, I just talked about people relocating. We talked about a lot of trends. Why are rents increasing? We have rent control. Why would rents in California be jumping 20% in 1 year when the limit is 9%? And how is this working out? Well, if you scour the internet and you listen to people and you talk to people, there's a whole host of reasons. It's not just really one reason, but one thing to keep in mind is that not all properties are subject to rent control. And that's true not just in California, but many other states. And by the way, not just California implemented rent control in recent years, but many, many other states. Oregon, Washington preceded California in their rent increase, of course, New York. And now we're finding many other cities and states are implementing rent controls. And as we'll get to in a minute, rent control always causes rent to increase. I believe, for these reasons, and we'll talk about and also
Chris, it sounds like your internet's cutting out. And
gosh, I see that. Okay, did it come back?
Yeah, you sound good now.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I live in Loomis out here, and sometimes our internet, I have to get it over a radio wave, and sometimes it's not so great. So next time we'll do this from the office. So population relocation. If you're in a place like Gilbert, Arizona, where it was peaceful and quiet, and for the past 20 years, and all of a sudden people are fleeing from California to Arizona, a place like Arizona or Texas, Dallas, Tempe, Arizona, and such. They just don't have the housing capacity to handle that. So just like Ryan was talking about, the fight to get your offer accepted is now similar when it comes to renting a property in these cities, because people move there and they find very, very little inventory, and they're having to fight very hard to get a property, secure a property for rent. The last two items I have here: government regulation. for me, my observation, this is really one of the biggest reasons that we're seeing rent increases, as substantial as we are. When landlords and investors who own property for many years, and this is their retirement, they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they hear about rent control, they start to think a little bit, they start to panic just a little bit, and the mindset becomes not just keep my tenant happy, but I've got to make this pay, so I have to stay up with the market. So they're wanting to increase those rents as soon as they can. Eviction moratoriums have come into play. We'll talk about those in just a minute. Building regulations have increased tremendously over the past few years, which means it's a lot more difficult to get a permit, get permission, if you will, to build a property where you want it, the way you want it. I and many have owned, for years we've been trying to build on those lots, and frankly, many people have given up. I personally have sold both of my lots because the red tape, the fees, the regulation over regulation is just making it almost impossible to build, which is unfortunate because that creates our limited supply of homes. If we could build, obviously, more properties, then there would be more stock available, and as the rules of supply and demand apply, rents would not be so high as they are. But that's what we have with increased
Chris,
government. Yeah.
Where were those lots? You cut out for a minute there. Where did you say those lots were? You have?
I'll tell you what. Yeah. Okay. Where did I leave off, Ryan? Sorry.
No, we got most of it. Just didn't hear where those lots were. Were they here in Sacramento, or were they elsewhere?
Oh yeah, those were one. Yeah, both of them in Sacramento, city of Sacramento.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, you just cut out for
and many of my
5
colleagues.
seconds there.
Yeah, many of my colleagues who also own lots and have owned lots. We've just basically sold those. One of the ones I sold is still vacant. The other one, they turned it into a parking lot. The cost, the fees to build, just to get your permits now. If you want to build a 6-plex, for example, an 8-plex, you're looking at fees on the order of $85,000 to $100,000 per unit before you ever go rent the backhoe and start digging. So that would be just the plan inspection, plan reviews, permits, city hookup. These kind of things are very, very cost prohibitive, and so this has played an important role in our supply of homes. Now, I manage mostly single family homes, duplexes, 4plexes, all the way up to 20, 25 units. So these are you drive around Sacramento. I went to the airport yesterday. I came home from the airport, and you can see just massive numbers of apartments being built. That's a whole nother report. But what I'm speaking of here really are the single family to duplex to 4plex units. And there is a market of renters out there that just don't want an apartment. Of course, they want to have a home with a yard and a garage, these kind of things. So this is where we're seeing the government not coming in and building, and the large builders, but we're seeing these massive apartment buildings going in. So a lot of change there. All of this contributes to what I was talking about before. The mom and pop, owners, their attitude is changing. They are becoming more corporate minded in what they're doing. So, our landlords going through now their properties and saying, gee, it would be a lot nicer to put granite counters in or upgrade the HVAC units and such. Not like they were at all. It's so common now to see, and I'm talking with landlords in a group of landlords in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago, and in the Bay Area, and they were talking about how when the air conditioner units or the heater units go bad, they don't want to put in a new system. they're looking for used parts. They're looking to replace components of that HVAC system instead of replacing the whole unit, because it just won't be cost effective. It doesn't provide any greater return to upgrade the property, make it nicer for those tenants. So as you see, prices going up and the quality of the stock going down. If you have any kids who've gone to college in places like Berkeley and some of the inner cities, and you visited them, it's like, oh, wow, this is barely a habitable unit. And really, that's what I'm going to call more corporate minded, as opposed to the mom and pop minded landlord who took a lot of pride in their, in their rental unit. Now, before I go too much further, I don't want to sound too pessimistic here, because what I'm really wanting to do is just make you more aware. I assume I'm speaking to people who want to be a landlord, want to be an investor, or have rental units, or selling homes to new investors and seasoned investors. So I just want to make you more aware of what's going on, because this rental market has changed. This landlording business has changed a lot. So I said before, rent control equals higher rents. Not all properties are subject to rent control. For example, most single family homes, are not subject to rent control. And we won't get into which ones are and which ones aren't. Rent control now allows a 9% increase currently in Northern California. And here's the big one. In the lower left here, we've got vacancy decontrol. So imagine you have a property, you're under rent control, you can't raise the rents very much, you go 9%. But if you're way behind on your rent, that's going to take you years to catch up. But when that property comes vacant, you can raise the rent to any number that you want. So, if you're $500 under market, the property comes vacant, you clean it up, paint it, and make it smell good. And now you can put that property on the market for a market rent. That being said, there are a number of state legislators in California who want to get rid of vacancy decontrol, and they
Chris,
want vacancy.
You just cut out again. Sorry.
Yeah.
You said there were a couple of legislators who are trying to do what?
They want to control properties even during vacancy. So let's say you were renting a property, it's $1,000 a month, but really it's worth $1,500 a month. When the tenant moves out, of course, now you can raise that rent to $1,500, put it back on the market and rent it for market rent. But there's a group of legislators, and proposals have been made in committees to say, no, we're only going to allow you to go pick a number, 10%. So $1,000 rent might only be able to go to $1,100 during vacancy. So for every time, the investor starts to benefit, and legislators make a change, and then landlords have to make a change, and so they can again reap the benefit, make their property make sense. And this little cat and mouse game goes on and on. Vacancy decontrol is probably a big issue we're going to see. It's been murmuring in the halls of our legislative institutions for quite a few years, and I'm expecting to see a bill come through certainly within the next year or two that creates control of rent even when the property is vacant. Also, we talked about reduced supply, less investing, less building. All of this contributes to higher rents, and a lot of it really stems from government regulation, the local levels, the national levels, and it's not just in California. This is across the nation now. All right, so this is the part where, again, I don't want to get all negative here, or have you think that I'm saying that this landlording business is not a great business, because I still believe, as we'll talk about in a minute, that the landlord business is a fantastic way to build wealth. It has many benefits. We'll cover a few, but the business is not what it was even 3 years ago. Regulations have changed tremendously, and a lot of older landlords, as I travel up and down the state, and talk to them, and I'll tell them, you know, things have changed. And yeah. And they really aren't, it's not registering with them in a real way until something bad happens. They try to give a tenant a notice to vacate, or they make a repair the way they used to make a repair, you know, because the forms, the addendums, the repair procedures, the fair housing rules, these have all changed 100% in the last 2 and 3 years. It's not okay to have a water leak in your home anymore, and you know, fix the leak and then paint the you know, the surface with Kills, you know, scrape off the mold and use bleach and paint the surface with Kills anymore. That's the kind of thing that people are coming to our association with, saying, you know, why do I have this lawsuit for
Hey, Chris, you cut out for a bit again.
300,000. Goodness, this is awful. Well, okay, where did I cut out?
You were just talking about the lawsuits. You didn't mention anything about them, like price or whatever.
Okay, all right. So these things that we experienced, we did not experience just a few years ago. For example, I'll go back to the page. I don't know if you heard that. Mold is a big issue. Water intrusion into a home has to be handled very different than it was just a few years ago, or you can almost bet you're going to see something come down the pipe from some attorney representing the tenant saying, you did that repair wrong, we suffered, and now there's fines and lawyers' fees, and there a couple of years ago. Fair housing has changed tremendously. You know, this is a whole hour seminar on its own. And if you're not aware of these rules, then you need to be aware. You need to make sure that your clients are aware, that you're aware, because for years, landlords have felt like, well, you know, I'm going to manage the home myself because I live in the same city, or it's close to me, it's only 10 miles from me. And, you know, that's a very old way of thinking, because proximity to your investment means virtually nothing anymore. It meant a lot back in the day, because you could run over and, you know, fix something or deal with the landlord or the tenant directly. You could drive by and see the property. But now our focus has become not so much relationship with the tenant such, but making corrected and so on. So the consequences for not knowing the rules, and you know, the old rule is ignorance of the law is no excuse. The consequences have changed tremendously, and I'm not sure if it cut out, but I'm seeing lawsuits for things that we wouldn't have even thought of a few years ago come through to our association members. Are experiencing $500,000 government fines, $1 million government fines. We're seeing lawsuits for incorrect repairs where tenants really weren't affected, but the landlord didn't do the repair correctly, for in the millions of dollars. Well, then not lose that, but he's going to have to defend himself. So these are the kind of liability and risk factors that landlords must be aware of. The business has changed tremendously. And so it's still an incredible business. In fact, it's even a better business now, that I believe, than it was a few years ago in many ways, because the dividend is so high. The rents are so high now. So if you want to get involved in this, or you want to stay involved in it, you want to make sure that you're really up, or you have a resource with a relationship with somebody, a professional, who can keep you apprised of all the changes, or you're headed down a very risky path. As I said before, and I can't say it enough times, the attitudes of tenants have changed. They are getting bombarded with rights, with the awareness of what their rights are and are not, and they often misinterpret those rights. Owners are becoming more corporate minded, and is really the landscape.
Chris, you cut out there again.
Just happened. All right, well, let's move on. People ask where we are in the eviction moratorium. Am I with you? Are you with me?
Yeah, we need to tie it up too and get Dean speaking. So like 2 more minutes.
Okay, here we go. Okay, we're the eviction moratorium in some sense has been lifted, but we still are in what we call phase 3 of the eviction moratorium. And the eviction moratorium, I can now go to court and try to evict somebody. However, other roadblocks have been put in the way. And just to suffice it to say that free legal aid services have come to the tenants now and made landlording, made evictions still almost impossible in many cases, especially when it comes to an eviction for non-payment of rent. And I'll just give an example of, we used to serve a 3-day, when a tenant didn't pay rent, we'd serve a 3-day notice to pay rent. Now it's a 15 to 30-day notice, 15-day to pay or 30 days to get out. Free legal aid comes in and we're getting bombarded with motions to quash. I didn't get served property. That gives the tenant another 20 to 30 days for a new hearing. And then we'll serve the tenant in front of the judge, in which the tenant turns around through the advice of legal aid and such, and they file again and say, well, I didn't get served, so they get another, until the court gets tired of seeing that person come back. These motions to quash, the motions to vacate judgment, motions to stays of execution are postponing evictions that used to happen in 6 weeks to well beyond 6 months, year and a half. We have clients who've been trying to evict their tenants for 2 years, multiple court cases going back, appearance, and they cannot get the tenants out. It takes a long time. Again, if you know the rules, when you get into the landlord-tenant relationship and you do your paperwork correctly, you can cut that time right back to where it's supposed to be, 1, 2, 3 months, and the tenant can be out. But you must make sure that you hit the home run when you complete the paperwork, when you move the tenant in. All right, Joel, you talked about this bill. A lot of landlords say, I'm getting out of the business. Well, again, it's that cat and mouse game, the landlords and the government. The landlord wants to get out of the business. There's an Assembly Bill 854 working its way through the Assembly Appropriations Committee. In fact, it just passed the Appropriations Committee last week to say, look, landlords need to stay in business for at least 5 years after they purchase a property, whether they're profitable or not. I'm not going to get too much into this bill because the fact is it's still working its way through the legislature, and we're not sure how that's going to come out. Finally, as I said, why do we stay in business? Well, because it's a great way to build wealth. It's a great way to create an incredible retirement, save a lot of money on taxes, so on and so forth. And these are just some of the reasons that I stay in the business, and many people are getting into the business. And that's the appreciation, depreciation, the use of leverage. You put a small amount of money down, you control a large asset. Mortgage buy down, the tenant's paying your mortgage. Hedge against inflation. You listen to Warren Buffett and these guys, hard assets like real estate, great hedge against inflation. We know we're coming into inflationary times right now, and so on. So that's really, in my mind, it outweighs all of these risks and stuff. I hope we can take away from what I just said as to not, hey, let's get out of the rental business. Actually, in some way,
You're cutting out again.
You must have a way to educate yourself, and you must adapt. I really apologize for this silly internet. I'm not sure why it's being so bad, but that's awful. I hate listening to people when the internet, when their audio quality is not good, but that's what it is today. So that wraps it up for me, Joel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Chris, I really appreciate you. I respect the work you do and keep fighting the good fight as we go forward. I want to introduce Dean Worley. Dean is a principal at John Burns Real Estate Consulting, which is well, I mean, a lot of people think it's one of the best in the United States. And he has over 20 years of experience. I think you've been working there since 2010. He's been doing all kinds of analysis and residential and commercial projects throughout the United States during that time. His BA is from CSU Fullerton. His MA and PhD are from UCLA. And he hosts the New Home Insights podcast. Take it away, Dean.
Hey, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up. I'll look at the chat. I don't know if Ryan's really good at looking at the chat. I'll try to be that good, but I'm not always that good. So let me start with, we're going to have a lot more numbers and trends. Ryan's, his images are phenomenal. Those are great. I don't have a lot of those. I'm sad that I don't. I got to do more of those, but those were good. So real quick, just what we do at John Burns Real Estate Consulting. We're kind of the two halves of the business. One is in these research publications at the metro level, at the regional level, at the national level that track everything to do, not just real estate, but with economic indicators and mortgage rates and permits and things like U-Haul data and stuff like that. And then what I do is the custom consulting. So my day in, day out is doing market feasibility studies for builders, developers, hedge funds, JVs, occasionally governments, anybody at all who's looking at a piece of property that's specific. And we recommend pricing, and product and things like that in rental and for sale. Now, we'll start with a little bit of just fundamentals. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start my slideshow here. Sorry about that. Let me go to now. Hopefully you guys, can you, Joel, can you tell me if we're seeing the primary?
I'm not seeing the slideshow yet.
Okay. Oh, let me redo that. Sorry about that. Hold on one second. Let me go. And first, let me, okay, I'm sorry. Let me share my screen. I think I forgot to share my screen. That's terrible. Now, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay. Sorry about that. Now let me start the slideshow from the beginning, and then I'm going to switch it over to the main screen, and you should see my main screen.
It looks great.
Full size.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So let's go right to it. Let's go to mortgage rates. I think Ryan's right. I think we're going to see mortgage rates start to creep up. We already have, of course, but I think they'll continue to start to creep up. We're projecting, you see here in the lower right, this is our 4-year projection. Well, actually 3 years. We're now in 2022. Honestly, I think, and we're probably going to see that revised a little bit upward here shortly. We're coming out with new projections next month, and my suspicion is will be more like 4% and earlier. So, I mean, that's still well below the long-term norm, which is maybe something like 6%, but that is going to put some downward pressure on pricing through sheer affordability. It's still pretty low. Historically, there's, when there's mortgage rate increases, there's a little bit of a hiccup, but folks tend to acclimate to it and recover. When prices, though, have gotten as high as they are now, that's going to be a little more difficult. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that it will put a little bit of a damper on demand if mortgage rates do go up a lot faster and more than we're projecting right now. But just, I guess the takeaway here is, though, we do project mortgage rates to still be gradually going up, and something that typically the market tends to acclimate to. Here's some job growth. I want to show this because, we have had this tremendous job growth over the last year or so, and that's reflected. You can see my cursor, that's reflected in these lines right here, which is current. And by the way, in all these, I show some Bay Area and the Stockton MSA for context. The Sacramento MSA will always be in the purple here on all these lines. And by MSA, I mean metropolitan statistical area. So in the Sacramento case, it's the 4-county metro area. These others like East Bay is Alameda and Contra Costa. San Jose is basically Santa Clara. And then San Francisco is a funky one. It's Marin, San Francisco, and San Mateo counties combined, just so you know, have some geographical context there. But we are projecting down here. You can see we project some very strong regional job growth here in 2022. These numbers here are Sacramento MSA specifically. We expect that, honestly, I don't know that we're going to get that 42,000. We'll see. The supply chain woes are still happening. Omicron is still being worked through, even though thankfully it's decreasing pretty rapidly now. But, you know, so we'll see what happens in 2022. My suspicion is it comes out lower, but still, 18,000 folks we project for full year 2021 is a historically normal kind of year for Sacramento. It's a pretty solid level of job growth. And again, we are at least near term expecting a little bit better this year. In terms of, I'll be quick. I'll be quick on a lot of things now. I don't think I have that much time. But the key takeaway from the job growth by industry is really, I think, these two here. The 11% you see in construction, and that would be a much higher number if more people were willing to work construction. But a lot of people construction, but a lot of folks, honestly, it's a tough job. It pays decently. But, you know, to a lot of folks, it's more attractive to be a barista than it is to be on a construction site. So they're having a terrible trouble with labor shortage on a lot of construction sites. That still has translated, though, into tremendous growth in that sector. And here's the other key one, the 8.4% you see in the professional and business services, the PBS. That's a great number because those tend to be more white collar jobs, more high income jobs. The census, my understanding, is still figuring out where they're going to count people, because a lot of those jobs are anchored, as we know now, with the remote work revolution. They're anchored in the Bay Area, but they're living here now. So we'll see how that, how that effectively gets tied out. But right now, Sacramento is experiencing some pretty solid higher income growth, even though our overall income growth, which we'll see in a little bit, has been just okay. This is income by price, or I'm sorry, this is employment by income group, by income category. The takeaway here, I think, is that, you know, we still are below median. There's a lot of folks here below our $81,000 regional median household income level. And those folks, I mean, they're being serviced by below market rate rentals or older rentals for the most part. They're not in the for sale business, the for sale sector at all. But Sacramento has a big number of these relatively higher income folks. As Ryan mentioned, there are a lot of those cash buyers, who are buying the $1 million plus homes. They're very often, as you know, from the Bay Area. Unemployment looking good. We have a very low unemployment rate at 4.7%. You'll see sometimes, you'll see some grades up here, and those grades are calculated against the long-term norm specific to the MSA. So in this case, that 4.7 rate is an A plus, given the long-term norm of Sacramento MSA. Just so you know, you'll see that again on affordability in a minute as well. But our unemployment rate, as we know, is looking very, very good. Income growth, as I mentioned, has just been, not spectacular. We enjoyed a lot of really strong levels in 15, 16, and so on. You can see that here, the historical, that's the annual year-over-year percent household income growth. We are projecting modest to decent income growth in the next 4 years, with inflation higher now and with labor shortages still in place. I would not at all be surprised to see that income growth go up to, one, to keep pace with inflation, for two, because people feel really free to quit right now, because there's a lot of jobs wanting and not as many people looking for those jobs, and a lot of folks switching jobs too, which is another way to gain income growth. So I wouldn't be surprised if, when we do re-forecast next month, we see those numbers go up a little bit here in Sacramento. Now let's talk about the market. This is the meat of what I want to talk about today. So I have some existing home prices here. And again, what we've done here is to show you some context. We have included a lot of the Bay Area MSAs. Again, Sacramento is in the purple down here, up with the Stockton MSA, which, by the way, is just San Joaquin County. And, over here on the right, we have, that's the percent above the previous peak. That is, in most cases, 2006, 2007. How much have prices risen? It's not adjusting for inflation, so that's exaggerated for sure. But still, as we know, we've seen this just remarkable price growth in places like San Jose MSA, San Francisco, even the East Bay. Sacramento is much more modest, and Stockton is even more modest than that. Adjusting for inflation, our prices aren't insanely high above peak, but I would caution that those peak levels were, of course, kind of some funny money and some really terrible mortgage policies and things like that made for some phony pricing. We have seen some tremendous price increases over these last year and a half, and steady price increases since really about 2012 or so. So we are in the 43% you see here above peak, I think, is a little bit misleading, because actually it is a higher price market than that, and especially that price appreciation, as we all know, has been accelerating just exponentially here lately. existing home sales. This is a lot. I think we have a few resale brokers and agents in the audience, I believe. So we're projecting kind of steady as she goes. We've seen this peak here, this perk up to about 40,000 MSA wide level of existing home sales. We expect it to stay steady. You know, I don't know. So it's all going to depend on supply and how much supply is opened up, and mortgage rates, things like that. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if we tilt that down a little bit in our reforecast. But you can see the crazy years of the 2003, 4, 5, and 6 were well below those levels. Investor activity, I'm assuming, is pretty important to the audience. I think a lot of folks, not you guys, but a lot of folks who think about the market don't realize how big a part investors, widely defined, have been in all markets, but in Sacramento specifically, for a very long time. It's the norm to have a fifth or more of the market be investors. And that includes second home people and true investor buyers and institutional mom and pops and fix and flip and those folks like that. It's long-term. You can see down here is maybe the best one, where it's something like 20 high teens% of the Sacramento MSA has been investor purchases. That's peaked up now lately. You can see not as much as the REOs of the 2010, 11, 12 period, but it's perked up to more than a quarter of the market recently. So we've seen a lot more investor activity, both institutional and individual or low, small level investors. So it has been an augmentation, I guess, to the kind of sales volumes we're seeing, but it's not crazy above what the long-term norm is. So I don't see it as, you see some news reports about how, our investors drive enterprises. I mean, I don't know, a very, very marginally, if any at all. Ultimately those folks have to make money. You've seen, Ryan talked about the iBuyer folks, and I think they did overbid. And I saw some comments in the chat section that show that a lot of those iBuyer listings are above market. I think they're above market because they overpaid. And I think they overpaid because they wanted to gain market share. Zillow didn't blame it. Zillow blamed it on their algorithm didn't work. But my suspicion, total speculation, by the way, is that in reality, they wanted to get as much market share as fast as possible. And the marching orders for that buyer division was to buy, and they regretted it. So anyway, the investor part of the market has popped above the norm, but I wouldn't characterize it as insane or non-sustainable. Flip, this is the true fix and flip kind of buyers. Again, that really has popped up here and lately. It's up 21% year over year through Q3 of 2021. We haven't got the Q4 data yet. I think that'll be out next month. So that has, been, again, a fairly recent time that's popped up, but it tends to fluctuate a little more than the overall investor buyer share of the market. So we'll see where that goes. Again, those folks need to make money. They can't overpay and expect to flip it for a profit very soon. So the market will discipline those folks, and they'll discipline the market. New home sales. So again, Sacramento MSA, show you some Bay Area and Stockton MSAs for regional context. I think what, again, the takeaway here is that here's Sacramento is a bigger market than folks realize. Everybody thinks that Bay Area is this massive market, and combined it is. When you merge all of their MSAs in one giant, actually technically they're metropolitan divisions, some of them. When you merge them into a census-defined MSA, something like, depending on the definition, it could be 9 counties, 11 counties. Yes, that's a bigger market. But Sacramento's 4-county MSA is a much bigger market than any of the East Bay, San Francisco, or San Jose in terms of new home sales. So we're a volume market. And the builder divisions look for Sacramento within California to reach a lot of their volumes. Of course, nationally, they're looking at Texas and the Carolinas and places like that, and Arizona to reach volumes, and they're looking to California for profit. But in terms of regionally, Sacramento is an important part of the new home market. Here's a key. Now, again, I sound like I'm kind of backing off these projections you see here, and I kind of am, because I think some of them are a little bit, they need to be updated. I'll say that. And I think one of those is the volumes here. I'm expecting 8,000 plus annual new home sales, MSA-wide for Sacramento going forward. The break on that, the hurdle to that happening is going to be supply. We are very, very low supply. Yes, we have seen an increase in open projects, but it's still tough. It still takes a long time to get things through the whole entitlement process. Still very difficult. There's all the supply chain woes. I mean, there's there's some new home builders that are out there. They're doing things like putting in fake garage doors that can seal the envelope, they say it, but it's a non-working garage door just so they can finalize that sale and close that contract, because otherwise they might have to wait weeks or months for a garage door to come because the supply chain is so messed up and manufacturing is so far behind in it. And the labor shortage is so difficult. All their subs, it's difficult to get homes built. So those kinds of things, which I don't see winding down immediately, and I see still being present throughout at least this year for the most part, are going to put a brake a little bit on seeing the kind of increase that you see here in this projection. I would argue that these numbers are going to be lower, but it's not so much demand as it is supply related. And by the way, I can't see the chat, so I apologize if anybody's chatting at me. It's just not visible on my screen, so sorry. This is just who the dominant players are in the new home world. Lennar is the 8 billion pound gorilla in Sacramento. Got in Fresno even more, but you know, NDC, by the way, is Richmond American Homes, and JMC and Woodside and KB. This is ranked by number of projects, so it's a little misleading because Black Pine is a good builder, but a lot of these of their 10 projects are kind of small time, so they're not selling the volume of homes that a KB or a Taylor Morrison is selling. So, but overall, though, Sacramento is close to 50-50. It's a little more public than it is private, which is fairly normal for a growth kind of, you know, quote unquote suburban kind of market. And you know, so there's the privates are, it's tough to find land to compete against the Lennars and Taylor Morrisons of the world if you're a private builder, but they're still managing to maintain their presence here. This, I'll skip that. New home prices now, again, got some regional context. We've got down here in the lower right, the crazy levels of appreciation, the right column. So this column here, I had to cut to show it. I had to cut off. There's a longer trend here, and the category headings are above this, but I had to cut it off. This is just the median home price, and this is the year-over-year percent increase within the Sacramento MSA. And you can see what, I mean, we know what's been happening. It started to slow down there a little bit here, year over year, early in the year, which is, again, see, Ryan mentioned this too. I completely agree. There's an element of seasonality going on right now. The market has slowed down. It has toned down. The key though is slowed down, is slowing, not slow. And that's critical. People want to hear you say slow in certain contexts. And it's not slow at all, but it is slower. Price increases have flattened a little bit. You can see here, they peaked up here in October and November, year over year here in Sacramento. But generally speaking, the second half of the year, there has been a little bit of slowing in the market. And again, and I absolutely agree. I think a chunk of that is seasonality. Another part of that is just prices have gotten so high. They've literally just pushing people out of the new home market. And in turn, the existing home market has pushed some people with those prices out into the rental market. And in some cases, they've been pushed out to Gilbert, Arizona, or East Tennessee. I saw one context. Affordability, this is, again, gauged against the Sacramento, the specific geographic Sacramento MSA norm. We're a little bit overpriced. We think the intrinsic value, this gauge is a new measure of affordability, by the way. And it's based mainly on the housing cost ratio to income ratio. And but we think the intrinsic value is more like 31% for the Sacramento MSA. Right now, it's about 36%. It's not crazy. So it's not from a long-term norm of Sacramento. We aren't crazily overpriced right now or unaffordable right now. We are a little bit, and that's getting worse all the time as prices continue to go up. And it pushes more people out of the new home market. It pushes more people into the rental market. It pushes more people out of the area, but it's not extreme from the Sacramento norm. Permits, real quick, single family permits have been going up mostly for the most part since about 2012. We expect them to surge next year. I'm sorry, they surged this year. We expect them to be up the next couple of years. To the degree they don't go up that high, I would argue it's going to be mostly supply constraints and supply impacts. And multifamily permits, multifamily permits have actually been going up since 2017, fairly dramatically in many years. So, we are building a lot more apartments. I don't think the rental control is going to have very little, if any, impact on multifamily supply. I think there's plenty of profit to be made and a 9% annual rent increase when the market allows for that, by the way. So I don't think that's going to be a big hindrance to supply. Entitlements certainly, maybe CEQA always is a problem there with all the lawsuits from that. But generally speaking, we expect multifamily permits to pop up in 2022 and 2023. They've been lower this year, obviously, just mainly from all the problems with COVID and with entitlements. But this overall multifamily is certainly something that's on the way up here. But nowhere near, as you know, nowhere near some of the crazy years. If this went back to the early 80s, we had some insane multifamily permits years in Sacramento that will never be reached again. It's a different world though here. And something called the EP ratio is what this shows. That's the demand supply. So it's permits and job growth, sorry. 1.2 is considered kind of a roughly equilibrium. That is 1.2 jobs for every permit. We have had some phenomenal years. Look at 2012, 5+, negative in 2020, of course, because of all the COVID-related job losses, popping right back at 2.6. I want to stress that. That's a phenomenal number. It's a tremendous number, and that's going to lead to price increases and to the affordability issues that we maybe have now. We expect that number to be, this year will come in at a little more normal. We expect it to be higher with those earlier employment gains that we're projecting for next year. Again, my suspicion is that it probably won't be quite that high, but still a good number. And then shrinking as job gains that are projected dissipate a little bit in 23 and 24. But still, really good numbers. A lot of pent-up demand involved when you have a lot of these folks just simply couldn't be satisfied in those years. Months of supply, as Ryan said, honestly, if you can get a home right now and you really are in the market for a good reason, then just do it. Like Dora says, actually, I think it's Maraca or something like that. Don't question it, just do it. Supply is insanely low. A part of this, of course, is seasonality, and it will peak back up here starting now. But certainly it's very low. We used to think 6 months was an equilibrium supply. Now some folks say it's 4 or 5 months. I think with technology, it's probably even lower than that, because things like iBuyers, things and just the internet have things go so much faster. But still, it's been under 2 months now for years and years and years. So we are living in kind of a new reality, a new normal of a very constrained market. But right now, that constraint is even more heightened than normal. Quick look ahead. I have 3 more slides here. One is the new home sales closings. You kind of saw this a minute ago, so I just want to put it all in one spot here. This is the Sacramento MSA. We are projecting this growth in new home sales over the next few years. As I mentioned, I suspect it's going to be a little lower this because of supply constraints and labor shortages, material shortages, et cetera, we talked about. Still, again, from the long-term norm, we are not at where the Sacramento MSA fundamentally could support. My own gauge for the Sacramento MSA could comfortably, in a normal market year, get 8,000-9,000 new home sales easily, maybe even more than that. We haven't been doing that since the last market dip starting in 2006. We've been nowhere near it for most of that period. So again, there's some pent-up demand. I would argue there's room for growth. Constraints will be supply, constraints will be price, but certainly as a market, we can be a bigger market than we are now. This remote work revolution, by the way, has been game changing. By the way, just an aside on that, we just bought a lot of postal service data to see kind of where the population movements have been. We haven't sorted that out yet. I think we just got it like last week. But from what we've seen so far, the vast majority of those folks leaving the Bay Area have been moving very close. Something like 4 out of 5 of those folks have actually stayed in Northern California. They're not all going to Boise and Arizona and Texas. A lot are, but California is so huge that even a little ripple leaving California can be a big wave in places like Gilbert, Arizona, or even parts of Texas, certainly Boise, Reno, Salt Lake City. So it's been a big impact. Don't get me wrong, from California buyers out to those places. But the bulk of those folks who have joined the remote revolution and now can work from home or staying close to home. And because of probably we'll see a lot more hybrid work schedules. That is, they'll be called into the office 2 times a week, 3 times a week. Those folks are going to have to stay fairly close to home. In fact, probably even closer than Sacramento. We've from our studies we've been doing, we've seen a lot of that remote work dissipate already. It's been shrinking for at least 3, 4, 5 months, which just makes sense. They've either made the decision or they haven't. But they're also in their back of their mind is like, okay, sometime this year, 2022, I'm going to be called back to the office at least a couple times a week. That's a rough commute from Folsom, wherever, Roseville, anywhere in Sacramento. So places like Tracy, Mountain House, Vacaville, Fairfield, Highway 4 area with Pittsburgh, and I think Brentwood and Oakley, those places make a lot more sense for that potential hybrid work schedule than Sacramento does. But Sacramento makes a lot more sense than, again, Reno, Texas, Arizona. You just can't do it. So I would argue as people are pulled back, we have the potential to see some greater demand come back to those outlying areas of the Bay, but it might not affect it won't affect Sacramento like it did in late 2020 and through most of 2021, because to the degree those folks have to go back to the office a decent amount of time, Sacramento's not going to be an option. So we'll see what happens. But a lot of the remote work is going to be permanent though. And that's good for our market for sure. And then lastly, we have new home price appreciation. It's hard to see the 20 here, but the 20 for 2021 full year is what we estimate the final year will come out for the median new home price within the Sacramento MSA. We're projecting about 8% next year, and then it slows down and it goes negative in 2024. I think this number is I don't know. We'll see if we get that high, but we have certainly seen this December was a good December. January 1st so far has been good. We typically do see a seasonal pop here coming in the next couple of months through June, July. We have every reason to think we'll see that again. So I think we're going to be solidly positive this year in 2022 for new home price appreciation. I just don't know that it's going to be quite 8%. We'll see. And just so you know, this trend you see here, this downward trend, that's in time with our take on the national. It's not a Sacramento thing. That's a national kind of trend. We have almost every MSA going slightly negative in 2024 based on just, really the end of the cycle. As Ryan mentioned, this is the longest cycle in the history of cycles. It's a very long cycle. So it has to come to an end. The prices absolutely do. They fluctuate. You have this, if you do a linear trend line, it's going up, but the fluctuation brings the actual line above and below that in a snake-like formation that has to happen again. It will happen again. It's a matter of when and to what degree. So we'll see, but this is our projection as of now. Real quick, so I want to talk about kind of then being the 2005, 6, 7, 8 disaster in the market, right? And how, and now being current, and what some differences and some similarities in terms of some key fundamental factors were. The economy then was actually going down. We were losing jobs in 2007 and 8. And in fact, I think they actually called the recession, in hindsight, started in the fourth quarter of 2007, before the blow up in August of 2008. So very different now, which we have very strong job growth, good income growth. We're projecting even stronger job growth next year. That's going to depend a lot on COVID, a lot on supply chains, a lot on materials and things like that. But still, we looking at a pretty good economic year for 2022. So, a little bit better situation than it was that time before we kind of fell off a cliff, right? Mortgage rates were higher then. They were more like 6%. They're lower now. They're a little over 3%. They've come up, and we do expect them to rise, but nowhere near 6%. So again, a little bit better. Our fundamentals are a little bit more positive now than they were before the cliff. Supply is the biggest one. Back then we had this, hopefully you'll get that. No one has yet, so maybe not, but that's an overhang. It's not a guy pushing up a meteor, which is what one person thought. It is actually a guy hanging from a rock face, I guess. And we had a huge supply overhang back in 2005 and 6. We built a ton of homes in Sacramento and all over the country. Sacramento was one of the definite big major oversuppliers at the time. So, now of course, it couldn't be more different. We have very limited supply, even though our supply has been increasing here in the new home world within Sacramento within the last year or so. It's done so modestly, and it's very sustainable level of actual new home sales, if not, as I mentioned a minute ago, room for growth. So that is the single biggest factor that will protect us from this a kind of a bubble cliff counter reaction out of all factors I can think of is the level of supply. The one thing that worries me though, and the most, is price appreciation. We had price appreciation that was tremendous leading up to that. It lasted many years. And we have had this price appreciation now in Sacramento for a long time, since 2012, but it wasn't crazy in 12, 13, 14. It's been nuts though. So we've kind of caught up to that heightened price appreciation environment that was present last time. We've kind of caught up to that here in this last year and a half plus. So that's the biggest concern. I know the sales rates and sales volume still say that the market's very healthy. Demand is still very good. The remote work revolution is not over. It's still buttressing our market. But ultimately, when you do have extreme price appreciated environments, the longer that goes on and the more extreme that is, the more likely you are going to hit a bigger issue and a bigger problem down the road. So that's my biggest concern. And of course, what I don't have here, and I probably should, is inflation. Now, all of a sudden, the last couple of years, we've had some heightened inflation. You know, is it due to government policies with all the money put into the market? Is it due to COVID and supply hiccups and things like that? Of course, the answer is both. You always hear people bitching and moaning about, oh, it's that, oh, it's this. It's both. Obviously, it's both. I mean, we put in a ton of money back in 2010 and 11, and we didn't have appreciation out of it. All the inflation hawks were wrong, but we put in a hell of a lot more this time than we did last time, like 5 times more or more than that. So that's certainly part of the inflation story for sure, but obviously COVID is the big difference between now and then, and that's certainly a part of it as well. As COVID starts to recede, I mean, knock on wood that I don't have near me, and as the supply chain kind of things start to pull back, I think we'll see that money sopped up and inflation dissipate, but it's a concern now going ahead. And I think that is it, Joel.
Dean, thank you so much. That was awesome. Chris and Ryan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Dean, I always get a lot from your stats. I love the stats, and I feel like I'm coming away from this couple of hours with a different view on what's going to likely happen this year and next year and the year after. And because I'm seeing some different stats in my brain and kind of readjusting, recalibrating how, how new input comes in, and because it's a new field. And so it's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to see how it works for the next 3 to 5 years, because I think within 5 years, we'll definitely be down a bit. And so maybe next time we'll do more Q&As, but I really appreciate you guys coming. I want to stop now and just end, and we'll send everybody who is on and everybody who signed up a copy of the video. And thank you so much for presenting, all 3 of you. Really appreciate it. You're wonderful. And look forward to connecting here again in the near future.
Thanks for hosting, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next year we go live somewhere. We all meet live.
Yeah, that's the goal. Next year we go live.
Back to the Hyatt or something.